everyone. Welcome to another Random Talk Sunday, and today I thought it'd be interesting at least for this Easter Sunday, to discuss a film that came out relatively recently, like on Friday, I believe, was its opening premiere, technically. Um, and it's not only been very hyped up, but it's kind of been hyped up to be very disappointing. And surprisingly, I really wasn't that disappointed with this particular film as I thought I was going to be. So, without further ado, let me just address the sort of elephant in the room here, being the title of this video, which has to do with Batman vs. Superman. Yes, this film. I believe Dawn of Justice is part of the title too, but I could be wrong. I've just been seeing the previews of just it saying Batman versus Superman, and I think it really does live up to that because obviously Batman and Superman do present a sort of rivalry within this film, and do try to take up a significant portion of the screen. Although I will say that most of their time is not as well utilized, only because the actors that at least portray them are relatively bland. And it's not to say that the actors do necessarily a poor job, it's just that they don't give off a whole much, or at least a huge amount of personality as far as a superhero is concerned. And also, this film ties in a lot with the Man of Steel film, and the Man of Steel film follows Superman, and you sort of see how the events in Man of Steel sort of end up impacting sort of what happens within this film, and how Batman and Superman develop this sort of rivalry between each other, and you sort of see the tension mount a little as the film progresses. And as far as the effects and all of that is concerned, I mean, a lot of it is really CGI heavy. And I almost want to say that it almost is sort of, I would say, probably fairly impossible to really do a lot of what they end up really presenting within this film in the form of, actual props and whatnot. One of the villains, again, is completely CG, but obviously he is supposed to be this really out there, crazy, powerful monster that it's sort of difficult to really see that being propped up in any way to where it could look in any way, shape, or form really realistic. So I sort of give the CGI within this film a pass, only because it is so common in a lot of other films. It's not necessarily the best, but it could have obviously been a lot worse. So it's kind of like in the middle for me as far as that whole area is concerned. But as far as the way in which it approached itself there, I thought it was pretty standard. It wasn't the worst, but again, it wasn't the best either. So it held its own for what it could ultimately do. Now, as far as, again, the main characters for the most part are fairly bland, I would say. They're not really big standouts. Although I will say Ben Affleck did impress me by actually kind of taking the role seriously. So at least that was something that I think a lot of people were sort of worried about, and I was kind of glad here that he did take a certain level of, seriousness to the role of playing Batman, and you could kind of tell that he was trying to kind of hone in that dramatic aspect to his character. Again, even though he's not really given a huge amount to work with as far as personality. He's definitely not the worst that I've seen of the people that have tried to at least play Batman, but at the same time, I don't think he brings anything new to the table as far as the character is concerned. And that's the same with Superman. But I think Superman in it of himself is a very bland superhero, so there's not really a huge amount of character really to say, at least about Superman. So, um, and also Wonder Woman is supposedly within this film, but she's not really given a huge amount of screen time. So don't expect a huge amount of Superwoman until, or excuse me, Wonder Woman. Getting the names mixed up. Wonder Woman. Don't expect a huge amount of her because she's not in it for a significant majority of the film, and she's not even really in her outfit until really the end. So again, they do really keep it on the focus of what it really should be, which is obviously the Batman and Superman rivalry. Now you will see, not only will you see how Man of Steel sort of leads up to this rivalry, but again, you sort of get a context into Batman and his whole backstory. Um, and you sort of see the struggles that Superman's kind of going through as well. But what does stand out actually about this film, and I kind of was thoroughly entertained by, was uh, one of the villains. I believe his name's Jesse Eisenberg, if I'm not mistaken, the guy who was in the Notebook, or not, excuse me, not the Notebook, the Social Network. And he plays this villain so interestingly. He plays him in such a psychotic way to the point where it really not only makes him uh, seem very insane, but he also does it with like such intelligence too. Um, Only because he's really honing in on the fact that he can do a lot of damage through him being fairly smart. Um, and you sort of see how he uh, ultimately wants to use kryptonite, which is really Superman's greatest weakness, to his advantage. Um, and you'll kind of see the extent that he goes in order to sort of obtain the substance and use it, and also the I guess you could say uh, ways in which he really sabotages other people in order to sort of get what he wants. Um, and you really get the impression that this villain is supposed to be one of the, not only one of the more main villains, but he's also supposed to be the kind of mastermind behind sort of the whole uh, rivalry that ends up escalating between sort of Superman and Batman, and how that plays out. So again, he's probably the only one that I think really did try to create a character behind the role that he was given. Um, all of the other people just kind of, I felt, phoned things in a little bit. Um, there wasn't really one person that impressed me, I guess, more than his character, only because I thought he was just trying to be so out there and so expressive that he gave off an impression that he was fairly psychotic and a great manipulator. And there's one point where you will see how Peach Chi comes into this, and it's pretty great because his character makes you pay attention because he leaves these little bits and hints of his sort of evilness within the film, based upon the lines that he says and the way in which he expresses himself. So ultimately, that villain was actually really probably one of the most impressive things about this film. everything else is pretty phoned. And even when one of the main characters supposedly dies at the end, I'm not going to give away who it is, but you don't really feel too much, only because that there could have been tons of different ways more that this could have been executed to where one of the main characters wouldn't have had to die. It's one of those kinds of climaxes that kind of leaves you going, really, that didn't need to happen. That didn't need to be. But apparently, it's supposed to be relatively close to the comics, from what I've heard, surprisingly. So, if you really enjoy the comics, you actually might not mind this film because it kind of stays true to the comics. Um, and apparently, the sort of doomsday villain, the big scary monster villain, uh, ends up being relatively accurate to what he looks like in the comics. So, again, you could argue whether or not that's important, but again, it's one that shows you how sort of they're trying to roll out a similar thing to what Marvel is doing, which is trying to bring about all these different characters and kind of bring out the various comics, whether they be accurate or consistent to the comics, or kind of revolve around the comics but are not necessarily true source material, I guess. It seems like that they're really trying to push forward this idea that we're going to bring all these new potential heroes from the DC universe, and we're going to put out probably some other villains too. So, they're really playing around with all of these different ideas, it seems like. And again, it's definitely not as impressive as something like the Avengers. I will say that. Obviously, it is not even close to up to where Marvel is as far as their films are concerned. I think they definitely need to try a lot harder in order for them to kind of compete on that same level, unfortunately. It's not to say that, again, Avengers is the greatest comic book movie ever. But it is to say that if they want to compete on the Avengers playing field, they kind of have to up their game here. They have to really, really hone in and try here. And although I think this did have some surprises, and I think uh, exceeded my really, 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 really low expectations with this film, um, it's still got a lot of work to go. It's got a lot of problems. It's got a lot of things that, again, don't really need to kind of be there. And there are certain parts where you're kind of, you feel like that things could have been obviously stripped down, I think. Because this film does feel a little bit long. It does go on for quite some time, and yeah, they could have chopped certain parts out and kept things, I think, a little bit more consistent. And although you do understand the sort of Superman Batman rivalry and they hone in on that really well, um, again, the characters aren't as interesting. So it's very difficult to really kind of get behind it. Even though, you can understand why they sort of have this um, sort of kind of misunderstanding and sort of this tension between them. Um, but yeah, I think that's really all I could say though about this film without really giving too much away. I mean, if you if you're open-minded, I'd say, and if you're not expecting too much from this film, I think you can come out with a little bit of sense of enjoyment from it. Um, but if you want this to be like Avengers, if you want this to be like the Marvel franchise that they have going, and think that they're going to do the same with DC, you're going to probably be a little bit disappointed, only because, again, there's not a huge amount as far as this particular film that makes it on that same level, unfortunately. And it would be nice if they could do something more, but that's pretty much all they have for now. Um, and you know, but if you come with an open mind, you could probably get behind certain aspects. But it's difficult to say really where they're trying to go with any of the things that they've really kind of presented, or at least tried to put a platform on. Um, but again, I guess it's not as shocking or surprising as something like the Avengers was. So yeah, just kind of go in with fairly not as high expectations, and you might, and I think there will be a sense, a little bit of enjoyment from it. I thought it was better than Man of Steel only because I thought it was a little bit more entertaining, and um, again, I don't really care really much for Superman as a hero. I think he's very overrated, and he kind of doesn't really have a whole lot of weaknesses to him. He only has the kryptonite thing, and you'll see how Batman tries to utilize that, and it is great. It is genius. But at the same time, again, there's not a huge amount of character behind these uh, characters that we've already seen time and time again. So it's kind of, I think that's really what sets this film unfortunately down a little bit as well, because there have been so many renditions of Batman, there have been so many renditions of Superman, so it's hard to really try to hone in something new here, and unfortunately it's not with these performances and with these characters. But I think that's really ultimately all I can say, though. If there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year, and I hope to see you on the next video. Take care.